Hello chess fans, it really happened on the final day of 2024. A World Chess Championship match between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, world's #1. These two guys, they have a huge history for about 2 years. They don't like each other, they have this huge cheating scandal, but they settled and they have to play against each other in the quarterfinals of the World Blitz Chess Championship match. 4 games are going to be played and time control 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. Well, this is something I really would like to show you. Apologies for the small delay. As you can see, I'm not at home. I'm enjoying my holidays. It is, I think, about 40 degrees difference, Fahrenheit difference with New York. So I need to use my towel sometimes to take away the sweat from my face. Apologies for that, but I hope you appreciate the support. And well, if you did like my videos in 2024, I think also this year you are going to enjoy. I will try to cover even more exciting chess news as much as I can, but I need your support. So please subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate all the support. Here we go. Magnus Carlsen was playing with the white pieces in game 1. That was an uneventful game, ended in a draw. But games 2, 3 and 4, they were bloody exciting. And well, I'm going to cover it here. So let's have a look. So we are looking at game 2. And it is Hans playing with white. E4, C5. Magnus is going for the Sicilian. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Rossolimo. And Magnus played here the move e5. This is a trendy sideline. A lot of interesting ideas there. Knight c3, d6, bishop c4. That's remarkable, right? Moving the bishop first to b5 and then to c4. Well, white is saying that, okay, you have fixed the structure in the center. There's this hole on d5. I want to control that light square. And we have actually a very well-known position in which black is having an extra tempo because white has moved the bishop twice. But because of the character of play, it's not such a big deal. Bishop e7, d3, knight f6, h3. Very interesting idea. What is Hans contemplating here? Well, it's all about the control over that d5 square. And with this move h3, after casting, he prepares this move, knight h2. He wants to go for knight g4 and then trade off that knight on f6. If the knight on f6 is gone, well then white has better control over the d5 square. Bishop e6 and Hans goes for knight g4. It's a very interesting plan and Magnus spent here a bit of time, but he missed a big opportunity as black can actually play here. Fantastic move, knight takes e4. It's a temporal piece sacrifice. The idea is that if you take with the knight back, there is the move d5 and black regains the piece with fantastic play. This is all working out beautifully for black because he has more space in the center. So also if you do take with a pawn, then the bishop on c4 is hanging. Also doesn't work. If white would decide to take first on e6, then black also has the intermediate capture, knight takes c3, attacking the queen. If you take on f7 with check, rook takes back, can take back with a pawn. And here, well, it's interesting position, but black is better here. Black no longer has this hole on d5 and can, for instance, play a move like d5. But again, it's a blitz game, missed opportunities, but a very important one. Instead, Magnus played knight e4, white played a move a4. Still the same idea with knight takes e4 is possible, but instead a6 was played. Now Hans decides to take on f6. Bishop takes knight e5. And here also interesting, like Magnus, as usual, at the beginning rounds, at the starting rounds of the day, he's usually not as sharp as he should be. Like if you do play a typical move like bishop g5, black should be alright. But he played b5 very quickly. And after a takes b5, he started to spend a lot of time realizing that he made a mistake. You would like to take back with the pawn and attack the bishop, but the problem is that after rook takes rook, queen takes back, you're destroying the kingside structure here with knight takes f6, g takes f6, and something like this is looking incredibly dangerous for black with his weakened king, the double pawns. So Magnus admitted his mistake, didn't take back with the pawn, but instead recaptured with the knight. And now, okay, you just have a weakness on a6. Bishop d2. White can continue developing here. Bishop g5, bishop a5. White is avoiding the exchange of dark squared bishops, attacking the queen. Queen goes to b8, castling kingside, and here king h8. So there are ideas to generate active play here with f5 at some point, but white is very active. Played here queen h5 to attack the queen, to attack the bishop, pardon me, bishop d8. Bishops are coming off the board. It is actually white who is seizing here the initiative by playing the move f4. And you see that white is looking for opportunities, not only to put pressure against that weak pawn, but also by launching an attack against the king. Well, there are a lot of problems here for black. f6, trying to hold on to the structure. Pawn takes e5. And here d takes e5 was played. King h2. Knight d6. Black is aiming for more exchanges. b3, but white is strengthening the structure here with the move b3. a5, knight c3, knight takes c4, pawn takes c4, queen d2. All of a sudden, looks like Magnus is back in the game. Attacking the knight, attacking the pawn on c2, knight a4, queen takes c2, knight takes c5. Materials even, but okay, the bishop is not such a bad piece, and it drops back to f7 to hit the queen. Queen goes back to d1. The queens are coming off the board. This is what Magnus in general likes, like, yeah, the problematic situation. But there's some clarity now in this endgame. But how to evaluate this position? Well, rook fb8, putting pressure against the pawn on b3, even though the pawn is still defended by the knight. White plays rook a3 to defend. And I can see that Magnus is struggling here. If you play an active move like h5 to stop all these sort of back rank issues, it's the game. But why to play first rook b8 and then move your rook to c8? That looks quite remarkable. And it does allow knight b7, which gives white the opportunity to win the pawn on a5. Or after rook ab8, just play knight d6. That's even better with a knight fork against the bishop, against the rook. Rook c7, rook takes a5. White is up a pawn. And that's not just a random pawn. It's connected past pawns on the queen side, as the pawn on b3 cannot be taken. There is knight takes f7, rook takes, and rook d8 with back rank mate. That's why it would have been so useful for black to play a move like h5 earlier. Now this comes too late. Black played king g8, just protecting the bishop. But here rook b5, neutralizing the pressure down the b file. Rook a8, knight takes f7, transforming the advantage into a double rook endgame. And now the pawns are coming forward. Black goes rook a2. White plays b4, rook b2. Okay, black is trying to stop the pawns. One in front, one behind. But what to do? I mean, white can do the same. If you do play rook c1, it looks very difficult to stop the march of these queenside pawns. But Hans played here this move, rook to b8. Interesting idea. Does allow rook takes c5. That's an interesting idea. Like if you do take the rook, there is rook takes b8. But rook d7 check. And where's the king going? Only 2 squares available. g6 is probably the best, but it does look risky in view of doubling the rooks on the 7th, and the pawn on g7 is going to be hanging. Therefore, Magnus being low on time, I mean both players down to about 10 seconds on the clock, king e6 was played, rook takes g7, and now look at this. If you just move your rook away, it does allow rook b6 with a ladder mate on the 6th and 7th rank, because the pawn on e4 is taking away these squares. Of course, Magnus realized that he needs to stop the threat of rook b6, went for the move rook c6 himself, but after b5, look at this. This rook is in trouble, as white has ideas to go rook e8 and then take the rook on c6. Now, rook d6 was played, but that allows mate in 1. That is Hans Niemann taking the lead. 1.5 half. There are 2 more games to go, no panic, but Magnus doesn't feel comfortable playing against Hans, and well, he needs to strike back, and let's see if he's able to do that. Well, now in game 3, Magnus playing with the white pieces again went here for the move 1d4, knight f6. London system. We quickly go through it, and in fact it's not a real London system, because after c4 we're more back into some sort of queen's gambit declined. Knight c3, knight bd7, knight f3, bishop b4, bishop e2. Okay, all pretty standard and solid. Now, to be honest, I felt a little bit strange about Hans's move h6. I didn't really understand why he would play it, as white didn't have intentions of placing the bishop on g5. Maybe something like taking on c4, and white recaptures followed by something like c5 or knight b6. That looks like the way to go for black. But h6 played, queen b3, and now with pressure against the bishop on b4, if the bishop moves, also the pawn on b7 is hanging. Black decided to take on c3, but this gives white a very nice risk-free advantage with bishop pair, with an extra pawn in the center, at least an extra pawn able to challenge black's center. And that's what happens. b6, defending the pawn, c takes d5, e takes d5, and here the move c4. Now, of course, it is pleasant for white. Bishop e6, rook ea c1, c5. Black is trying to strike back, and okay, the position is not too bad for black. Rook fd1, queen e7, take on c5, knight takes, attacking the queen. Queen goes back to b2, rook fd8, but after pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop e5, okay, there is pressure, and white is trying to make use of that bishop pair, trying to weaken the king side here. f6, that's exactly what happens. Bishop to d4, rook c8. Black is rock solid, but there are some weaknesses. How should white proceed? There followed h3. That's a calm move like we have seen in the previous game. Magnus learns from his mistake that you should always anticipate any potential back rank problems. h3 is very useful. And what should black do? Well, black cannot do too much. But Hans played here knight a4, attacking the queen. Queen goes back. And knight goes back to c5. Hans is saying, okay, it's up to you, Mr. Magnus, to prove yourself here. Can white make progress here? Well, queen b1. So here you see that now the light squares are a potential target. Maybe the knight can go to h4, maybe to f5, g6. Black is still doing okay, but Hans played here the move knight a4, eyeing the c3 square. But queen a1, knight c5, bishop c4. Now the bishops are super active. Bishop f7, a4. Maybe you want to go a5 and destabilize that knight on c5. Knight b4. And here, Magnus comes up with an interesting decision. Played here the move, bishop takes knight. That's something not many of us would have done. But why did he play this move? Rook takes d1, rook takes d1. How to take back on c5? Well, if you move the queen away, then the 7th rank will be more vulnerable. I felt something like rook takes c5 is the natural move. But after bishop takes, king takes, you can put a knight on d4. And still, it's a position with major pieces and a knight on the board. It's all about king safety. I would always take white in such positions. Like it's long-term speaking, it's quite dangerous for black. But there is pawn takes c5 on the board. Magnus goes queen c3, and well, here, okay, maybe it's playable still for black. But Hans doesn't really know what to do. Played knight a2, queen goes to d3. He goes back with a knight to b4. Of course, Mr. Hans, Magnus knows that you want to make a draw against him because you're leading. But I think there are perhaps better ways trying to hold on to your position. Try to improve your slightly vulnerable king side, for instance. But here, after queen f5, that rook is in trouble. And there's also the threat of going rook to d7, destroying black's 7th rank. If you do play rook c7, though, there is bishop takes, king takes, and for instance, knight h4, queen g6, knight f5, etc. This looks very dangerous. There followed rook d8, but that allows rook takes rook, queen takes back, and the pawn on c5 is hanging. That is a huge pawn. And here, well, Hans Niemann is completely busted here with the black pieces. His knight is hanging, pawn is hanging as well. So black went for the move a5, now knight d4, closing that d-file. And well, after bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, check, king goes to h7, the queen comes in. And well, you can see there are threats like knight e6, knight f5, for instance, queen g8, queen e7, knight d5 attacking the queen, but queen c5 hits the pawn and also keeps an eye on that knight. If the queen moves, let's say it goes to a8, there is knight c6 and the pawn on a5 and the knight on d5 are both hanging. That's why Hans played here instead queen to d8, but that allows knight to e6, attacking the queen. And how is the queen going to keep that knight defended? Well, you cannot play queen d7. It does allow knight f8 with a very beautiful knight fork, winning the game. And therefore, black just moved the queen away, queen b8, but that is queen takes d5. Hans Niemann resigned, which means it's 1.5, 1.5. The match is tied again, and oh, what is this victory so important for Magnus Carlsen? Now, go back to the starting position as we have game 4 waiting for us. This time Hans is playing one e4 again, but Magnus no longer interested in playing that Sicilian. He's going to play it more solidly, e5, and we have the Italian opening, and that is something the two guys have been playing hundreds of times. Hans with white, Magnus with black, especially Magnus. He feels like a fish in the water in these sort of middle games. Black is rock solid. He knows it inside out. And interesting, up to this point on move 13, these two guys, they're following 2 games they have been playing before against each other in the Speed Chess finals in Paris in September 2024. And these 2 games, Hans played here the move queen b3. This time he plays actively with the move d4 immediately, threatening to double attack both the rook and the knight. How is Black going to deal with that? Well, you can always consider a move like d5. That is actually the equalizer here, I think. But Magnus tried to play it solid here with the move rook e8. Bishop e3. And now Magnus decides to take on d4. Because here, with the knight and the rook attacking the pawn on e4, White's kind of forced to take with the bishop on d4. But that's interesting, as Magnus Carlsen in the Blitz game, guys. 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. Magnus spent here about 1 minute before taking with the knight on d4. That's remarkable, but probably he also understood that even though he has a bishop in an open position, White's center is potentially quite dangerous. c6, queen b3, attacking the pawn. On b7, rook b8, rook a1. And, well, White is perfectly in control with beautiful pieces, beautiful knights on the king side. Rook e6, queen c2, queen is going back, g6. And okay, I guess that all White's pieces are doing quite well, especially a move like e5, intending to open up the d file, is a move which is really screamed to be played here. But queen c1 was played. Queen c1 is also natural, like you're attacking the pawn, and after king g7 there follows queen f4. But this is huge, guys, because Magnus Carlsen played here the move queen e7. And he's down to only 23 seconds. 23 seconds versus 2 minutes 17. Almost a 2-minute difference in a blitz game. That is something you almost never see. But how is Black getting out of here? Well, knight h4 was played. This is such an obvious threat. Like knight f5 forking the king and queen. That would win material. Therefore, Magnus played immediately king h7. He needs to speed up. But he's coming up with really good moves now. The knight on h4 is actually potential target, because maybe there are ideas to go knight h5 at some point, maybe not now. Maybe the pawn on e4 is vulnerable. So the knight is badly placed. It goes back to f3. Rook e8, attacking that pawn on e4 now 4 times. And Hans goes for e5. But knight e5, attacking the queen on f4. Queen to g4. And there is pawn takes e5, and it looks like Black is okay here, because you cannot take with a knight on e5. That runs into bishop takes d4, removing the defender of the knight on e5. And on next move, there is rook takes e5. Black is up a pawn. How should White recapture instead? Well, if you do take with the pawn, there's always bishop b8, and that pawn on e5 looks like it is in trouble. Therefore, rook takes e5 was played. But anyway, there is bishop to b8. And okay, only 13 seconds on the clock. It's an interesting move, bishop b8, but apparently you can even play more actively with a move like queen b4. But to be honest, I understand Magnus. Magnus is not a kind of gambler. He really wants to play it as solid as possible. He's really happy here after bishop b8 that rooks are coming off the board, and he's offering the exchange of queens, queen h4. And again, he's offering the exchange of queens. Maybe not objectively speaking the best move, but Magnus knows that he is never going to lose this position, playing against an isolated queen's pawn, which is beautifully defended by the knight. And also the bishop is a better piece. So this is a nice static advantage for Black. And the good news, especially for Magnus being low on time, is that now his position is much more clear. There are easy moves to be played in a way that maybe he doesn't play the best move, but he's playing good moves. That's what you need to do in Blitz. Just play good moves and don't make any blunders. Now, this position does have zero risk for Black. Knight f1. Knight was badly placed on g3 at this point. King g7. And Magnus plays very nice. g3. Rook e2. Well, he's trying to enter with a rook, but okay, not for long, because white is going to kick out that rook immediately. Rook back to e7, a3, knight c7. Look at this. This is very instructive. The knight was a very good blockader, but why does black drop back with that knight? Now after knight c4, rook d7, black has different ideas to use his pieces here to attack the pawn rather than blockading it. So that's an instructive maneuver. If you do play d5, well, there is bishop takes e3, and on the next move black is going to take the pawn on d5, d takes e6, runs into rook takes d1. So white cannot simplify here with offering the exchange of the isolated queen's pawn. Knight c2 played, and here f5. Black is making progress by getting the king into the game, and white tries the same. But why would you do that? That's very risky. I understand that you would like to have your king over on the queen side to defend these weaknesses, but there's c5, and black is exploiting the pressure down the d file. King c3, keeping everything defended. Pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, but look at this very annoying pin. Knight g5, setting up another idea to attack the pawn. Knight e4 is in the air. Rook f1 was played. Knight e4, king d3, knight c5 check. That's interesting. King goes back to e2, and there is knight a4 with an attack on that knight on d4 and the pawn on b2. So black is winning material now. Knight f3, rook e7, king d2, knight takes b2. Knight b4, black is up a pawn. Okay, white is fighting here. Knight d5 is a threat. Rook d7, king c3. The knight is temporarily misplaced at the edge of the board, but it's coming back into play, and that's a very nice extra pawn with a lot of strategical pluses here. And this is a matter of technique, as they say. Knight b3, g5, f3, bishop e8, provoking another weakness, g4, and here the knight comes in, attacking the pawn on h3. Rook e1, bishop e5, king b1, rook c7, rook d1, rook c3, attacking the knight, king a2, rook takes f3, that's pawn number 2, knight c5. White is looking for counterplay, but it's all coming too late here. Everything is pretty well covered. Pawn takes f5, but that doesn't make much of a difference. The pawn on f5 is going to be taken. Rook takes b7, and these two extra pawns, they are too strong. It doesn't matter what happens on the queen side with that pawn on a5. Rook h2 check. King goes back to b1. Bishop f6. Nice move. Covering all potential checks, dominating the knights and the rook. Rook b5. King goes away. Knight e4, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes away as well. And now after a check, king c1, knight e2. Okay, finally we have some change in the position as black succeeds in trading off another set of minor pieces, which gives more clarity. And the bishop goes back. a4, white is the one who starts running first, but the rook is excellently placed behind that pawn. The pawn is stopped, and this time it is black who is going to run. Look at this, very nice technique. There's no problem here. And Magnus having an extra pawn and the rook behind white's passer. Well, that's going to be decisive. Black is running with the pawn, and there's nothing white can do. So after the move h2 and move 85, it is Magnus Carlsen who managed to win that crucial game 4 in the mini match against Hans Niemann in the quarterfinals, and that helped him to win the match and move on to the semis. A very exciting match, but things could have gone differently as well, especially in that last game. Remember that 2-minute time advantage almost for Hans Niemann. It's remarkable that Magnus managed to come back into the match. Well, very exciting. I hope you like this coverage, these 3 games. And well, stay tuned for more very exciting videos on this channel in 2025, guys. See you soon again.